Good afternoon, boys and girls. It's time for another story time with Miss Leah. Now, today is Monday, and we are in the season of Lent. But as we get closer to Easter, which is this coming Sunday, this week is called Holy Week. And so this week, instead of showing our nature items every day, I thought that I would take you through some of the stories that are in between Palm Sunday and Easter, just like what we talked about in our Godly Play lesson yesterday. Now remember yesterday when I held up my really fun hourglass and it fell apart. And I said, that's not what I expected to have happen. But if you can imagine with me that we have flipped over our timer and that time is beginning to run out for Jesus. And Jesus knows that his time is running out. And a lot of the people that are around him still don't understand what's going to happen. And it is hard to understand how we go from Palm Sunday, where everybody is celebrating Jesus and calling him king, to all of a sudden, Jesus seems to be hated and he is hung on the cross to die in a humiliating way. So we're going to try to piece together some of the things that happen in between so that it's a little easier to understand how all those stories fit together. So I have this set of symbols that will help guide us through. So we're going to flip over our first one. I know sometimes this shows up backwards for you guys, but I can't do it backwards here, so we're going to just do what we can. Okay, so if you can see our first symbol, hard to see there with the glare, you see that that is Jesus, and he is riding on the donkey. And that is our symbol for yesterday. That was Palm Sunday. Now today, we're going to flip over another one. What do you see there? It is a bag of something. So I wonder what that could be about. And I wonder what could be under all of these other ones. So you'll have to come back every day this week to find out where we're headed. And what other symbols be under there. So on Monday of Jesus' final week, he went into the temple. And it's the story which we call Jesus clears out the temple. This is what the Bible says in Luke chapter 19. Then Jesus entered the temple courtyard. He began to drive out those who were selling there. He told them, "It is written that the Lord said, 'My house will be a house where people can pray,' but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day Jesus was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests and the teachers of the law were trying to kill him. So were the leaders among the people, but they couldn't find any way to do it. And all the people were paying close attention to his words. So we have here a money bag. Do you see the coins? And this really reminds me of two parts to this story. The first part is that Jesus in this story is kind of mad. He goes into the temple and he turns over the tables and he even shouts at people. And the Bible says he was mad because the people there were not honoring God. They were greedy. And they were doing things to take advantage of the people who were coming there to worship God. It also says in that story that the leaders were mad at Jesus and they were trying to find a way to kill him or trick him so that the people would think that he was a fake. But they couldn't find a way, and they needed a way so that they could do what they wanted to do. And so this part of the story is a sad part of the story. It's the story of Judas. And the money bag on our wooden board today is a symbol to represent the story of Judas. Now, Judas was one of Jesus' disciples, but he's the disciple that betrayed Jesus, and he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Now, Jesus knew that Judas would have to betray him, and he also knew that he would have to die. It didn't mean that Jesus wanted things to happen the way that they were supposed to, We know that he prayed in the garden, that God would help him not have to do that. But he also knew that he would do whatever God's will was. Now, Judas, it is a sad story, and it's a hard one to understand, because why would Judas do that? Why would he betray his teacher and his friend and the Son of God? And why would he do it for 30 pieces of silver? But we know that he did. We know that it hurt Jesus. And we know that Judas regretted doing it because he tried to give the money back, but it was too late. Now, I think that it's the saddest part of this story is that Judas wasn't around to hear the rest of the story. He was dead by the time Jesus rose from the dead. And he didn't experience Jesus' forgiveness because he didn't ask. And I think that Jesus would have forgiven him. And I think that the story could have ended differently, but it didn't. And this is one of those things that's part of this mystery of Easter. That sometimes things that are part of this story are uncomfortable and sad and heavy, just like our jar of rocks. And sometimes it's hard to make that make sense in our minds. But it's still part of the story. And it's still part of the sadness that we need to enter in this week as we get closer to Good Friday. And so that's why we remember. We remember those 30 pieces of silver. We remember Judas. And we remember Jesus and how it must have felt to be betrayed by one of his own. We are going to continue reading our stories this week too. So we're going to change gears here. And I'm going to continue reading from our Adventures of Peter Cottontail. Now, if you remember what's been happening, it's a lot of trickery in this story. We've tricked the skunk, and we've tricked the fox, and Peter Rabbit's been tricked. So this chapter is called Peter Rabbit Gets an Early Breakfast. And here's a picture of Reddy Fox, and with Peter Rabbit hiding in the bushes. So I wonder what's going to happen today in our story. Peter Rabbit crept out of his snug little bed in the middle of the old briar patch 2 hours before sunup and hurried over to the big hickory tree. Sure enough, close by, he found a beautiful bed of sweet clover, just as Reddy Fox had said would be there. Peter chuckled to himself as he ate and ate and ate until his little round stomach was so full that he could hardly hop away. When he had eaten all he could, he hurried back to the old briar patch to finish his morning nap, and all the time he kept chuckling to himself. You see, Peter was suspicious of Reddy Fox, and so he had gone over to the sweet clover bed alone 2 hours before sunup. Peter Rabbit had hardly left the sweet clover bed when Reddy Fox arrived. Reddy lay down in the long meadow grass and grinned to himself as he waited. Slowly the minutes went by until up from behind the purple hills came jolly, round, red Mr. Sun. But no Peter Rabbit. Reddy stopped grinning. Perhaps, he said to himself, Peter is waiting for me on the edge of the old briar patch and wasn't going to try to fool me. So Reddy hurried over to the old briar patch, and sure enough, there was Peter Rabbit sitting on the edge of it. When Peter saw him coming, he dodged in behind a big clump of friendly old brambles. Reddy came up with his broadest smile. Good morning, Peter Rabbit, said Reddy. Shall we go over to the sweet clover bed? Peter put one hand over his mouth to hide his smile. Oh, said he, I was so dreadfully hungry for the sweet clover that I couldn't wait until sunup, so I went over 2 hours ago. I hope you will excuse me, Reddy Fox. I certainly do appreciate your kindness in telling me of that new sweet clover bed. I hope I haven't put you out. Certainly not, replied Reddy Fox in his pleasantest manner. And you know Reddy Fox can be very pleasant indeed when he wants to be. It is a very great pleasure to be able to give you pleasure. There's nothing I so like to do as to pleasure you. By the way, I have just heard that Farmer Brown has a new planting of young cabbage in the corner of his garden. Will you meet me here at sunup tomorrow morning to go over there? I will be delighted to. I will indeed, replied Peter Rabbit. And all the time he smiled to himself behind his hand. Reddy Fox bade Peter goodbye in the pleasantest way you can imagine. Yet all the time down in his heart, Reddy was so angry that he hardly knew what to do. For you see, he had got to go back to Granny Fox without that tender young rabbit which he had promised her. This time I will be there 2 hours before sunup, and then we will see Peter Rabbit who is the smartest, said Reddy Fox to himself. Do you think it's going to work? Chapter 9, Reddy Fox Gets a Scare. Peter Rabbit looked up at the silvery moon and laughed aloud. Then he kicked up his heels and laughed again as he started out across the Green Meadows towards Farmer Brown's garden. You see, Peter was suspicious, very suspicious indeed of Reddy Fox. So, as it was a beautiful night for a walk, he thought he would just run on over to Farmer Brown's garden and see if he could find that bed of newly planted cabbage about which Reddy Fox had told him. So Peter hopped and skipped across the garden meadows, singing as he went, "Hold, old Miss Moon, hold up your light. Show the way, the little stars are shining bright. Night folks are all out to play." When Peter reached Farmer Brown's garden, he had no trouble in finding the new planting of cabbage. And it was very tender. It was good. My, how good it was. Peter started in to fill his little round stomach. He ate and he ate and he ate and he ate. By and by, just when he thought he couldn't eat another mouthful, he happened to look over to a patch of moonlight. For just a second, Peter's heart stopped beating. There was Reddy Fox coming straight over to the new cabbage bed. Peter Rabbit didn't know what to do. Reddy Fox hadn't seen him yet, but he would in a minute or two, unless Peter could hide. He was too far from the dear old briar patch to run there. Peter looked this way and that way. Ha! There lay Farmer Brown boy's old straw hat, just where he had left it when the supper horn blew. So Peter crawled under it, and it covered him completely. Peter peeped out from under one edge. He saw Reddy Fox standing in the moonlight, looking at the bed of newly set cabbage. Reddy was smiling, as if his thoughts were very pleasant. Peter shivered. He could just guess what Reddy was thinking, how he would gobble up Peter, when once he got him away from the safety of the old briar patch. The thought made Peter so indignant that he forgot that he was hiding, and he sat up on his hind legs. Of course, he lifted the straw hat with him. Then he remembered and sat down again in a hurry, of course. The straw hat went down quite as quickly. Presently, Peter peeped out. Reddy Fox was staring and staring at that old straw hat, and he wasn't smiling now. He actually looked frightened. It gave Peter an idea. He made 3 long hops straight towards Reddy Fox, all the time keeping the old straw hat over him. Of course, the hat went along with him, and because it covered Peter all the way up, it looked for all the world as if it was alive. Reddy Fox gave one more long look at the strange thing coming toward him through the cabbage bed, and then he started for home as fast as he could go, his tail between his legs. Peter Rabbit just lay right down where he was and laughed and laughed and laughed, and it almost seemed as if the old straw hat laughed too. Chapter 10. Peter has another great laugh. It was just sunup as Reddy Fox started down the lone little path to the Green Meadows. Reddy was late. He should be over at the old briar patch by this time. He was afraid now that Peter Rabbit would not be there. When he came in sight of the old briar patch, there sat Peter on the edge of it. "Good morning, Peter Rabbit," said Reddy Fox in his politest manner. "I am sorry to have kept you waiting. It is all because I had a terrible fright last night." "Is that so? What was it?" asked Peter, ducking down behind a big bramble branch to hide his smile. Why, I went over to Farmer Brown's garden to see if that new planting of young cabbage was all right, and there I met a terrible monster. It frightened me so that I did not dare to come out this morning until jolly round Mr. Sun had begun to climb up in the sky, and so I am a little late. Are you ready, Peter Rabbit, to go to the new planting of young cabbage with me?" asked Reddy in his pleasantest manner. Now, what do you think Peter Rabbit did? Why, Peter just began to laugh. He laughed and he laughed and he shouted. He lay down on his back and he kicked his heels for very joy. But all the time he took care to keep behind a big friendly bramble bush. Reddy Fox stared at Peter Rabbit. He just didn't know what to make of it. He began to think that Peter had gone crazy. He couldn't see a thing to laugh at, yet here was Peter laughing fit to kill himself. Finally, Peter stopped and sat up. Did the monster catch you, Reddy Fox?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "No," replied Reddy. "It didn't catch me, because I could run faster than it could, but it chased me all the way home. In that case, I think I'll not go up to the cabbage bed this morning, for you know I cannot run as fast as you can, Reddy, and the monster might catch me," replied Peter very gravely. "Besides," he added, "I have had my fill of tender young cabbage, and it was very nice indeed." "What?" shouted Reddy Fox. "Yes," continued Peter Rabbit. "I just couldn't wait till morning, so I went up there early last night. I'm much obliged to you for telling me of it, Reddy Fox. I am indeed." For just a little minute an ugly look crept into Reddy's face, for now he knew that once more Peter Rabbit had fooled him. But he kept his temper and managed to smile as he said, "Oh, don't mention it, Peter Rabbit, don't mention it. But tell me, didn't you meet the monster?" "No," replied Peter Rabbit. And then, do what he would, he couldn't keep sober any more. He began to laugh just as he had before. "What's the joke, Peter Rabbit? Tell me so I can laugh too," begged Reddy Fox. "Why," said Peter Rabbit, when he could get his breath, "the joke is that the monster that frightened you so was the old straw hat of Farmer Brown's boy, and I was underneath it. Ha, 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 ha." Then Reddy Fox knew just how badly Peter Rabbit had fooled him. With a snarl, he sprang right over the bramble bush at Peter Rabbit. But Peter was watching, and darted away along one of his own special little paths through the old briar patch. Reddy tried to follow, but the brambles tore his clothes and scratched his face and stuck his feet. Finally, he had to give up. Torn and bleeding and angry, he turned back home, and as he left the old briar patch, he could still hear Peter Rabbit laughing. Chapter 11. Shadow the Weasel Gets Lost. All the Green Meadows had heard how Peter Rabbit had frightened Reddy Fox with an old straw hat, and everywhere that Reddy went, someone was sure to shout after him, "Reddy Fox is fine to see. He's as brave can be, till he meets an old straw hat, then he don't know where he's at." Then Reddy would lose his temper and chase his tormentors. Most of all, he wanted to catch Peter Rabbit. He lay in wait for Peter in fence corners and behind bushes and trees, but somehow Peter always seemed to know what Reddy was doing. In the old briar patch, Peter was safe. Reddy had tried to follow him there, but he had found that it was of no use at all. Peter's paths were so narrow, and the brambles tore Reddy's clothes and scratched him so that he had to give it up. Reddy was thinking of this one day as he sat on his doorstep, scowling over at the old briar patch. And then, all of a sudden, he thought of Shadow the Weasel. Shadow is so slim that he can go almost anywhere that anyone else can, and he's so fierce that nearly all of the little meadow people are terribly afraid of him. Reddy smiled. It was a mean, wicked, crafty smile. Then he hopped up and hurried to find Shadow the Weasel and tell him his plan. Shadow listened And then he, too, began to smile. "It's easy, Reddy Fox, the easiest thing in the world. We'll get Peter Rabbit just as sure as fat hens are good eating," said he, and they started for the Old Briar patch. Reddy's plan was very simple. Shadow the Weasel was to follow Peter Rabbit along Peter's narrow little paths and drive Peter out of the Old Briar patch onto the Green Meadows, where Reddy Fox would be sure to catch him. So Reddy Fox sat down to wait while Shadow started into the Old Briar patch. Peter Rabbit heard him coming, and of course Peter began to run. Now, when Peter first made his home in the Old Briar patch, he had foreseen that someday Shadow the Weasel might come to hunt him there. So Peter had made dozens and dozens of little paths, twisting and turning and crossing and recrossing in the most puzzling way. Of course, Peter himself knew every twist and turn of every one of them, but Shadow had not gone very far before he was all mixed up. He kept his sharp little nose to the ground to smell Peter's footsteps, but Peter kept crossing his own tracks so often that pretty soon Shadow could not tell which path Peter had last taken. Peter led him further and farther into the middle of the Old Briar patch. Right there, Shadow came to a great big puddle of water. Peter had jumped clear across it, for you know Peter's legs are long and meant for jumping. Now Shadow hates to get his feet wet, and when he reached the puddle, he stopped. He glared with fierce little red eyes across at Peter Rabbit sitting on the other side. Then he started around the edge. Peter waited until Shadow was almost around, and then he jumped back across the puddle. There was nothing for Shadow to do but to go back around, which, of course, he did. Of course, Peter did just the same thing again, all the time laughing in his sleeve, for Shadow the Weasel was growing angrier and angrier. Finally, he grew so angry that he tried to jump the puddle himself, and in he fell with a great splash. When Shadow crawled out, wet and muddy, Peter had disappeared, and Shadow couldn't tell which path he had taken. Worse still, he didn't know which path to take to get himself out. He tried one after another, but after a little while he would find himself back at the puddle in the middle of the Old Briar patch. Shadow the Weasel was lost. Yes, sir, Shadow the Weasel was lost in the Old Briar patch. Outside, Reddy Fox waited and watched, but no frightened Peter Rabbit came jumping out as he expected. What could it mean? After a long time, he saw someone very muddy and very wet and very, very tired crawl out of one of Peter Rabbit's little paths. It was Shadow the Weasel. Reddy took one good look at him, and then he hurried away. He didn't want to hear what Shadow the Weasel would say, and as he hurried across the Green Meadows, he heard Peter Rabbit's voice from the middle of the Old Briar patch. "If at first you don't succeed, try again," shouted Peter Rabbit. Reddy Fox ground his teeth. All right, this is our last chapter for today. The Plot of Two Scamps. Sammy Jay, looking around for mischief, found Reddy Fox sitting on his doorstep with his chin in both hands and looking as if he hadn't a friend in the world. "What are you doing?" asked Sammy Jay. "I'm just a-studying," replied Reddy Fox. "What are you studying? Perhaps I can help you," said Sammy Jay. Reddy Fox heaved a long sigh. "I'm a-studying how I can catch Peter Rabbit," replied Reddy. Sammy Jay scratched his head thoughtfully. Reddy Fox still sat with his chin in his hands and thought and thought and thought. Sammy Jay sat on one foot and scratched and scratched and scratched his head with the other. Suddenly Sammy looked up. "I have it," said he. "You remember the hollow log over beyond the old hickory tree?" Reddy nodded his head. "Well, I'll go down and invite Peter Rabbit to come over there and see the strangest thing in the world. You know what great curiosity Peter Rabbit has. Now, You'll be hiding in the hollow log, and when you hear me say to Peter Rabbit, 'The strangest thing in the world is waiting for you over there, Peter,' then you'll spring out and you'll have Peter." Reddy Fox brightened up. The plan certainly did look good to Reddy. Peter had fooled him so many times that he was almost in despair. He knew that if he sent another invitation to Peter, Peter would suspect right away that it meant mischief. But Peter wouldn't think that Sammy Jay was planning mischief, because he knew that Sammy is the greatest news teller in all the Green Forest. So Reddy Fox trotted off to the hollow log down by the big hickory tree and crept inside. Sammy Jay flew over to the old briar patch to look for Peter Rabbit. He found him sitting under a big bramble bush. "Good morning, Peter Rabbit," said Sammy Jay with his finest manner. Peter looked at Sammy sharply as he returned his greeting. Sammy Jay wasn't in the habit of being so polite to Peter, and Peter began to study just what this could mean. "I saw the strangest thing in the world this morning," said Sammy Jay. Peter pricked up his ears. In spite of himself, he began to grow curious. "What was it, Sammy Jay?" he asked. Sammy looked very mysterious. "I really don't know what it is," he replied, "but I can show it to you if you want to see it for yourself, Peter Rabbit." Of course, Peter wanted to see it, so he started out across the Green Meadows with Sammy Jay. Now, the farther he went, the more time he had to think, and by the time he had nearly reached the old hickory tree, Peter began to suspect a trick. Sammy Jay motioned Peter to approach very carefully. "It's right over there in that hollow log, Peter," he whispered. "You go peep in, and you'll see it." Then Sammy prepared to give the signal to Reddy Fox. Peter hopped a couple of steps nearer, and then he sat up very straight and gazed into the hollow log. Somehow he didn't just like the looks of it. He didn't know why, but he just didn't. Then along came one of Old Mother West Wind's merry little breezes, danced right past the hollow log and up to Peter Rabbit, and with him he brought a funny smell. Peter's little wobbly nose wrinkled. That funny smell certainly reminded Peter of Reddy Fox. He wrinkled his nose again. Then he suddenly whirled about. "Excuse me, Sammy Jay," he exclaimed. "I just remembered something very important." And before Sammy Jay could open his mouth, Peter had started like a little brown streak for the old briar patch. Well, we'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out if Reddy Fox can get to Peter Rabbit. Peter Rabbit seems like a smart little rabbit to me, so we'll see if Reddy Fox gets his way. So remember to tune back in, and we'll keep going with our Holy Week story. We'll find out what we're going to flip over tomorrow, and I'll have another scripture for you tomorrow. So I'll see you then. So long.